Hello, my name is Ansley Munn. I'm one of the project coordinators for the Dominus project. Thank you all for coming to our event. I know the title is Overwhelmed, but we're hoping at this exact moment you do not feel overwhelmed, but you are at peace, your belly is full, there's bathrooms in the hall. I just glanced at the kids, they're all playing quietly at this time, reading books, and we have some really stellar sitters, so if they need, they will holler. The Dominus project, some of you already know us, and we know you, and we're so thankful for people who come back and support us in our events, but for those who don't know, the Dominus project, our goal and our mission is to encourage, equip, and accompany parents to be the primary catechists of their children. So the primary formators of the faith, the people who are passing it on directly to their children. So what that actually looks like is events like this, discipling parents, some sacramental programs in the parish setting. It's a small but mighty team, myself, Jennifer, and Brian. Brian will be here towards the end of the night. And we added Darren recently, who does our social media here in the back. But yes, we're really here to serve you. That is our goal. The parents of the Diocese of Baton Rouge, we're all three parents ourselves, which Jennifer will tell you about. And we're just really thankful that you said yes to this nighttime event to learn more about what Dr. Coolman has to offer. So I'm going to pass the mic to Jen to tell you a little bit more about our speaker.
Thank you, Ansley. Can you hear me? Close. Okay. So, like she said, my name is Jennifer Usher, and I am also a project coordinator for the Dominus project. And thank you all for being here. And I get to have the pleasure of introducing Dr. Coolman, and also to tell you why we're so excited to have her with us. So, as all of you know, Brian, Ansley, and I were all parents. We have 8 children between the 3 of us. Brady and Ansley had their littles. Brian and Adrian had their school-age boys. And then me and Sean have 4 children, 17 to 23. So we have the young adults. And so we're in the thick of it with all of you. And as you know, parenting, there's so much joy, but there are definitely seasons that can be overwhelming. And so, sometimes we say, I wish there were a manual, I wish there were a book to just go to and tell us exactly what to do. But because our children are so unique, because our families are so unique, we're coming at this from different angles, different cultures, different dynamics within the family, we know that that's not possible. So whenever Brian brought to us Dr. Coolman's book, it was such a breath of fresh air because her wisdom and her perspective speak to all. Dr. Coolman reminds us and encourages us to lift our eyes and remember to view our vocation of parenthood through the lens of faith. And when we do that, there is a message that speaks to everybody, no matter your age, no matter your family dynamic, no matter the difficulties that you may be facing. Through our faith, we know that our purpose and our purpose and our destination. We know that our children belong to God, and He is where we're leading them to, and we get to accompany them on this life's journey. So, we are so thrilled to bring this gem of a lady to our Baton Rouge community. God has gifted her with wisdom and a huge heart. She is a wife and a mom to 5 young adult children, 17 to 27. She is a theologian and a professor at Providence College. She has also just begun a new initiative called Come to the Table in her diocese, and where she is encouraging all families to begin again the routine of eating together as a family. I have the most respect for this woman, and I'm so honored to call her friend now, Dr. Taylor Coolman.
Friends, it's so nice to be with you, so nice to see you. I am coming to you from Providence, Rhode Island, on this trip. I grew up, however, in Florida, and I've said to a couple of my hosts here, it's really interesting to be back with things that look and feel sometimes more familiar to me. Melaleuca trees and the live oak, and here's the real clincher. Well, it's not the hottest that it gets, I know, in Baton Rouge, but even the heat and the humidity feel like home to me. So I want to just say thank you to you for having me. And as Jennifer mentioned, I actually have the opportunity to speak in a number of different places at different times. Of course, I'm teaching in the classroom, and I also end up sometimes at conferences that are more academic. It's how I came to know first Dr. Pedraza, also Dr. Whidden here at FranU via those channels. But here's my open secret. I really enjoy this kind of a talk much more. I don't want to say that academics are, not normal people, because I'm one of them. But, the fact of the matter is that for me, it's, now it's getting closer to 30 years. So much of my life has been spent together with my husband parenting our 5 children. And so it's really over the years increased a sense in me that when I meet folks like you, parents who are doing it right now, every day, there is that kind of deep kinship and solidarity that we start with. So the title I think that you have been given for tonight is Overwhelmed. This is when I give you the survival guide, right? This is the time. And, in a way, I want to kind of start with that. I think it's a helpful jumping off point. I want to say to you that I think we parents, we still have children in our home, including one growing up child. I think we are overwhelmed for a number of different reasons. It actually can affect different families differently. I think that for a number of years now, there's been a steady increase in the sort of frenetic pace of life that our families are trying to keep up with, a kind of busyness that we don't even describe as busyness anymore because it's just the normal pace of life. Now we just call it life. I think there are other factors that we have to take seriously. I'm so aware when we talk about big headlines about economics and about uncertainty and unrest, the way that those things affect parents as well. I know that in my own community, I am aware of, and I know parents who are living with significant economic challenges, working not one job, but 2 sometimes in the gig economy, trying to pull things together. I'm just going to say to you that I myself often feel overwhelmed, so I'm coming to you as a kindred soul in that reality. Sometimes I say to people, it's funny that, it was probably not coincidence at all, but the initiative that I'm working on in our home diocese is called Come to the Table. As Jennifer said, and my impression is that the challenges that we're facing are never more apparent than at the moment that we call dinner time, especially if you're actually trying to have a dinner time in some sense. You're holding on to the dream. You have kids who are tired. You have parents who are tired. Somebody apparently is supposed to cook and lay the dinner on the table in front of everyone. How that all is supposed to work is frankly a mystery. Who's watching the 3-year-old while that dinner is being prepared? It really sort of just doesn't add up. And we're hungry too. Let's just throw that in. Everybody's low blood sugar and hungry. So I'm going to come back to that in a moment, thinking through some of those concrete realities that may sound familiar to you as they are to me. But I want to draw your attention for a moment to the title that's given on the outline in front of you. Here's one possibility. If you're overwhelmed, maybe it's time to stop parenting. And here is what I mean by that. You can see that I've given you the term there in quotation marks. Maybe it's time to stop parenting. So one thing that I have learned that has been, it made sense to me, but really interesting to try to understand what it means is this. 100 years ago, nobody was parenting their children. There was no verb. In the English language, it did not exist. No, your grandparents parented nobody. The word appears in the 1970s for the very first time as a verb. It's an active verb with an object. These little people. It increases steadily in the 1980s. It takes off in the 1990s, and then the line on the graph just continues upwards. In terms of how many times do you hear the term, how many books are available, New York Times bestseller list on parenting. So what I want to do actually is pause here and invite you to just reflect on that with me. I mean, people have been speaking English for a while now. What were they doing? You know what I mean? Why did they not know they were parenting children? Yeah, I'm happy to have your thoughts about that.
For agricultural society, farms, everybody's doing the work on the chores all together all day.
So say more about it. What's the difference between parenting and doing chores together? You're too busy to parent. That's what he's saying. Us kids were out there foraging in the fields for corn to eat for dinner.
They were not inside.
Yeah. I like it, and I am just tempted as you are. I'll say more about this in a minute, to think, there are some big changes here that we'd have to take seriously to try to understand this. The details, by the way, are this. What we saw was that a sort of phase earlier in the late 40s and then really into the 50s and 60s, you saw the appearance of the term child rearing. In the 1950s, you were engaged in the science of child rearing. My mother-in-law got a degree in home economics in the 1950s, which included the subtopic of child rearing. Before that, if people spoke about the activity at all, they were raising children. That's what they were doing, raising children. So what I want to suggest is this. I do think it's helpful to go back and look at some of these big historical trends. And so I want to invite you to do that with me for just a second. I don't plan a talk in history and sociology, but let's talk about it for just a moment. First of all, I think we have to take seriously a move from a primarily agricultural economy to an economy where work takes on different forms. And I thought it was interesting, you sort of hinted at this, is necessarily, in many cases, done in isolation from one's family. The agricultural economy leaves families working together. The kind of work that you do, I bet that's hard to do do your work with your family. I think we actually might have to even turn back the historical clock one click further and think about what it means for that change from agricultural economy to different kinds of economy to also include the dissolution of certain kinds of community life. So here in the U.S., I think we are tempted to sometimes think about big family farms, especially because as family farms came to their latter stages, those were the farms that were successful, frankly. You had to have quite a bit of acreage to have a successful farm. But I want to encourage us also just for a moment to think about other possibilities. Agricultural, sure, but what about 1 million small towns. Maybe we could think not only of the US, but also Europe and other kinds of traditional cultures where agriculture was very important, but people also simply were living closer together, living with one another in forms of daily life that included extended family and village. So I think if we take those kinds of changes seriously, put that all together, a move in which we see a different kind of work happening, in which work necessarily takes you away from home. This is still a topic of a lot of conversation. Initially, of course, initially took young women. Young women were the first group to work in really big numbers in factories. Then took fathers. Then, in many cases, both parents trying to work while they are parenting at the same time. What that means is that there is a certain kind of setup of life that is deeply, fundamentally involving isolation. Again, I think it is so normative for us that it's actually hard to see. But I think of it all the time when I have conversations with young parents, especially when I have conversations with young moms who maybe are partly or entirely spending their lives at present with young children. In their homes, often not with their sister living next door, often not with their mother living next door, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And what I do is try to say to folks in that position, I am giving you permission right now, not only to say you feel overwhelmed at 4:30 in the afternoon when you're supposed to be putting dinner on the table, but also that you feel lonely. It's lonely. And maybe even, given the way that this life has been sliced and diced up, you feel bored. As much as you love these kids, you know what I mean? But you have been given a particular sector of work, and it's very hard to get it to connect to other parts of the adult world. My sense is that in that setup, what has happened is this. Whereas raising children in the past took place much more alongside an adult life of work, play, rest, cooking, et cetera, now it too has been isolated off to become its own project. At the same time, something else has happened. The project has come to be seen as the children themselves. The process involves producing a certain kind of child. There was one, I thought, extremely optimistic book that was published in the 1990s. It came from a religious press entitled, I just thought to put it so nicely, entitled, Training Your Children to Turn Out Right. So now there became a profound kind of focus on this work separated from other kinds of work. The children themselves become the products that are being offered to the world. And there's a huge question here. How will your children turn out? So the last thing that I want to say is this. This is a hypothesis. This is a working hypothesis on my part. But I think the thing that may characterize parenting, quote unquote, more than anything else, is the search for that formula. You know? I mean, and I don't want to say it's only turning out right. Surely we're looking for the formula for other things too. I want the formula that gets the 4-year-old to stay in bed. Especially like early in the morning. Why are they up at 5:30 talking to me. You know what I mean? I mean, I want to solve other things too. Or, how many issues of the grocery checkout magazines have been sold over the years promising you a 20-minute 5-ingredient dinner? I think there are 1 million 5-ingredient 20-minute dinner. I want to solve all that stuff too. And I'm saying this to you because I know that this is a community of people that are actually trying to do more than even just get the kid to stay in bed at 5:30 a.m., more than trying to get dinner on the table. There is a sense, isn't there, in which we want kids who turn out right. We want our kids to turn out right. So, in a very real sense, what I want to do tonight is to offer you a few suggestions, a few ideas. We're going to leave quite a bit of time here for Q&A because I'm also very aware that I'm talking to a group of people who are parenting right now, who may well have your own insights and thoughts about these things. So I want to leave time for a real conversation. But what I want to do is suggest to you that it may be the right time now to completely let go of that account of what we're up to, training our children to turn out right, and think about some other things as more fundamental, as more important. So, if we were going to do that, we would have to ask, if that's not what we're doing, if we're not trying to train children to turn out right, what are we doing? I mean, I know what you're doing. You're running around in the minivan. You're picking up something that the kid needs for school tomorrow. You're trying to get the uniform clean because the uniform's stuffed in the back of the van. I know all that. But what big picture are we doing? This is one of the things that's been most important to me as the years have gone on. What's the animating picture? And here what I want to do is to suggest to you just one image. It does come directly from the book that Jennifer mentioned, because it's been helpful for me. It's been instructive for me. And that is this. I think that we could fruitfully imagine parenting as being not primarily producing something, producing someone. And not even primarily instructing, not primarily disciplining. But the model that I want to suggest to you is that parents can be fruitfully understood as apprenticing. The children could be thought of as apprentices to their parents. So let me talk about that for a minute. You know this word, right? In New England, where I live, I think it's really interesting. We still have some of the old stone walls that New England is famous for. And there are actually a few people, it's a small number, who know how to build these stone walls. They're really beautiful. They last forever. The stones don't fall down. Many people actually have built those walls with no adjustment of the stones at all. They do not. They just know how to fit them. And if you want to learn how to do that, you can come back to Rhode Island with me, and you can apprentice yourself to a builder of stone walls. Or maybe you know about apprentices to great painters in the Renaissance period, et cetera, et cetera. In all these cases, the process is very similar. Obviously not so much sitting in a classroom listening to somebody. It is working alongside someone in a slow, graduated process of increasing involvement. So in almost every case, the first phase of that process is watching. And then there'll be some little thing that you can do. In the case of the Renaissance artists, sometimes apprentices would first be allowed to mix the colors. Not going to touch the canvas, but they're going to be allowed to mix the colors. And then they would be, at some point, they'd be allowed to add little details. You're going to get to paint in a wave on the ocean, et cetera, until they became painters themselves. So why do I suggest that? I think that you can see that the first thing it does is turns our attention away from a primary account of something that parents are doing to their children. It turns our attention to a kind of productive companionship. A companionship that also includes work. I don't mean to, make productivity the end all be here, but I'm saying it's more, isn't it? It's more than one-on-one time together. No, it's a project that people are focused on together. One clearly more experienced, more competent to do the work. I think it gives us a really helpful way to prioritize that posture, whether it really does mean working together with our children or not. I think that actually can be a very helpful implication of this. The other day I was at home. So we have a lot of children, as I mentioned, and some of them have left home now, and some of them have left home and come back. It's all really quite confusing. But our oldest daughter has moved back home. Now I'm actually happy about this. She is welcome because she brought her husband and also my grandbaby with her. So I have a dream version of a life right now where most days I get to spend some time with my just 3-year-old granddaughter. It was so interesting. The other day I was hanging out with her and I just needed to get a couple things. I wanted to load the dishwasher. And I realized what was going to make a lot more sense was actually to just stand at the sink and wash dishes and hand them to her and let her dry. And she'd never done that before. She was standing up on her step stool that she uses to get to the counter. But you know what? She absolutely this was before her 3rd birthday. She was 2. She's very advanced. My granddaughter. She's above average. You know what? She absolutely could dry a dish. So I think thinking about in terms of this model actually will push us a little bit toward imagining those exact kinds of moments with our children. There are ways that we can pursue projects together. But of course, when I offer it to you, I also mean it in a metaphorical sense. And I think the edge on this model is this. If you really take it seriously and think through it, what it means, if what you're doing maybe could be seen in this model is this. It might not be so much that you should take up this model, but that you already have, that you are apprenticing your children, whether you mean to be or not. And the time that you're spending with them is this powerful form of communication and formation. This is what we do. So I think that does at least a couple things. First of all, it really makes you ask what you're doing, doesn't it? I mean, what am I apprenticing? I hope I'm not just apprenticing my kids to running all over town in the minivan. And I think it also does something else.
Sorry.
I think it encourages you, I'll use the the metaphor of the painter, encourages you to think very carefully about your own craft. Because what you're doing is sharing what you have. There's going to be a way in which this model is going to say there's nothing that you're doing to your children that's more important than what you're doing to allow for and foster your own growth and life and embodiment of who God meant you to be. You know what I'm saying? I'm not saying, now sometimes people talk about it like, well, you need to go and leave your parenting behind for a minute to go and get re-energized and restored so you can go back to parenting. But I'm saying something different than that. I'm saying if you're apprenticing your children right now, you have to really ask what your own skills are and what you're teaching And attention to yourself is a fundamental part of parenting. And I think that could mean a lot of things, if we wanted to, we could think about some very sturdy traditional categories of work and love. We could think about repentance and celebration. We could think about doing some good grieving and fostering beautiful friendship. I mean, all of those things are, in this model, not going to be things you do so you can take a break from parenting. It's you fundamentally establishing the things that you want to hand on. So you can see that the next point that I have in your outline has to do with turning again, and Jennifer mentioned it, turning again to this category of vocation, rerooting ourselves in vocation. Here's what I mean by that. I know that for me, there's actually a temptation when I hear this word, parenting is a vocation, to take it to mean that means it's really serious and it's really important. I need to be more intentional. I'm exhausted. There's nothing on the table for dinner, but I need to be more intentional. And that's probably true. Vocation does say that parenting is not just a hobby that you have. But I'm not interested primarily in that implication. I want to say something else about the word vocation. And it gets lost, actually, in our everyday parlance when we talk about individual people having a vocation in this kind of work. Often it gets completely lost. And here's what I mean by that. You may know that there's an etymological connection that helps us to know what the word vocation means. There's a Latin word, actually, behind vocation that has to do with giving us the meaning. Dr. Whidden, can you tell us what the Latin word is behind the word vocation?
Vocare.
What's vocare mean, Dr. Whidden?
Oh.
It just literally means called. Like called out, to call out, vocare. Okay, but what that means is if you have a vocation, it's not just something you carry around in your pocket. Somebody is calling you. Somebody's calling you. So for me, this only deepens the sense. That person, by the way, is the Lord. So for me, this only deepens the sense that this is not just another exhausting to-do list that I'm going to carry around, except, now, in addition to trying to get rid of the red dyes and trying to buy the right shoes that the dadgum coach requires or whatever, now I also have to read Bible stories and get the kids to Mass. And because that imagines that I'm the origin. I'm the one initiating this project. But if I'm called, I'm not. I myself am also responding to a voice that comes before me. Calls, and of course we could say calls both me and my children. It's another dimension of vocation. And we can talk, more about that if you want to do that. I'm just going to say that sometimes I find that even those of us who ought to know better have to be reminded of some very, very simple things, like the person calling us loves us, already loves us, but I'm just going to throw that out there, okay? The person doing the calling is not somebody you need to impress in order to get their love. You're all set on that. So there's something else going on here that should be the goal. The second thing that I want to note here in vocation, related to vocation, I'm just so happy that we have this room full of people tonight that I can say this to. That vocation to parent, although of course it comes to individual people and to parent individual people, Can you tell me one of your children?
Audrey.
Audrey? Yeah, so you have a specific call to be a father to Audrey. But the fantastic news is this is also a communal call. This is also, you are among people who are called as well. I know these are simple claims that I'm making, but it's a little different, isn't it, than okay, look, I'm not accusing you of anything. I'm just saying that in the world around us, there is a very weird way in which we can slip right into thinking of parenting as being some kind of a competitive sport. Social media has not helped on this score. You're probably better at it. You probably have beautiful pictures of your family and your children, but holy mackerel, for me to try to get my kids to take these pictures that could go on Instagram, it's hopeless. But you see what I'm saying? If that's the danger, to think of our own children as products that we're creating or to offer them to other people, it doesn't help if we're living in this world of offering children up on social media. And I think that the more we really come to understand the communal character of this calling, the more that way of being and way of thinking is really relativized. Two things in particular I would say while I have you all together. I think I could talk about many different things. I just want to, for tonight, I just want to draw your attention to two possibilities. I think that in light of the character of the one who is calling us, I think that our communities of parenting are especially called to two things. One is I think we're called to tell each other the truth. I mean that in a couple different ways. I think we're called to let these masks slip a little bit that are about always having it all together. And tell each other the truth, what's really going on. Don't just do that randomly, okay? Of course, you already know you're going to do this in way, connected to friendship. But do you hear what I'm saying? We are swimming in a larger context that prizes that mask, that encourages that mask in very powerful ways, even when we're not aware of it, which is the most powerful way. And so if we want to do that, I just think it's going to really look like resistance. We are going to have a resistance movement of vulnerability and honesty. And I think as you build real friendship, real conversation, that truth-telling can happen in a lot of different ways. I think real friends can say to each other, I just think you're being too hard on yourself, and can also say, I don't know, it sounds to me like this is something that really needs your attention and your concern right now. How can I help you to think about that? The second thing that I want to say is, might sound like the other end of the spectrum, but I don't mean it that way. That is, I think that we who are called to be parents are called to be a part of communities of tenderness. Pope Francis spoke famously about a revolution of tenderness, which was a phrase that I loved. And I mean that both connected to our life with each other. Are we tender with each other? Now look, I know I'm back in the South. I know you're going to be nice. I know you're going to be polite. I'm not talking about being polite. Okay? I'm talking about holding those things in friendship and in conversation with tenderness and with care. And I'm telling you that I think that as communities of parents are able to really do that with one another, that is an absolutely essential element in being able to do that with our children. You can't just keep producing tenderness and care and attention and listening when you are not immersed in a community in which that is practiced. You're going to run out. You're going to keep pouring and you're going to run out. So I think that our communities, again, I'm sure that you and I could both come up with some other things, but I just tonight here in Baton Rouge, those are the two things that I want to encourage you to think about. Two more things that I want to say to you very briefly, then I'm going to stop and see, again, what your thoughts are, what your questions are, is this. You've already heard me say there actually is really an important way in which I want to invite you tonight at this event to let go of parenting as it, appeared in the 80s, the 90s, the noughts. That relentless, exhausting, competitive, highly managerial. It has a lot to do with being a manager of yourself and of your children. And it has the end goal of kids who turn out right. I really want to challenge you to think about just setting that project to one side. And the last thing that I want to say is, I think that one of the things that you should think about very clearly is this, very concretely. And this comes out of my own experience. This is just me reporting. This is my testimony to you. I'm just reporting to you. I think that as you do that, there are at least a couple of elements that can feel very hard to find for parents that can find their way back in. You see them on your outline. One of those is real rest. Now, look, I am not saying this to you as somebody who is not right there in the trenches with you. So I'm not saying to you, well, why don't you rest more? Why don't you just, I even kind of hate the well, just nap when the baby's napping. Well, I can't always just nap when the baby's napping. And once you have a toddler, you can never nap when the baby's, I'm not just saying, why don't you guys rest more? What I'm saying has to do with a deeper kind of rest, right? It has to do with letting go a little bit, with knowing that you have people around you who actually have your back, with knowing that you have people you can tell the truth to, with knowing that this is not a project that you dreamed up. You're called to it. And I think that allows a form of internal exhale. You feel it and your children are going to feel it too. And closely connected to that, I would actually talk about a category of play, which I think requires this kind of letting go. And yeah, I'll just say, I mean that both for yourselves and for your children. A kind of play that does not worry about turning out right, but simply being present in the moment with one another and with our children in a way that I think better honors the call that we have. Okay, I'm going to pause there. I think I have the microphone. There's just one microphone here. I can watch, so you're going to have to pry this microphone. No, yeah. Why don't we do it that way? I'm good at talking loud, but what thoughts do you have if something stood out to you? Share that with us, because that's going to help other people in the room think through it also. It is so hard. Thank you for saying that. And nobody tells you. You know what? This is gonna sound super melodramatic, but that's okay. Cool. In the Christian tradition, there's a long history of talking about the end of your life as a death, your own death, as being a really important thing for you to keep in mind. Funny enough, because it puts everything in perspective, right? It helps you, there's a lot of things that we worry about every day. And some of you have already had that experience of watching somebody close to you die and thinking, wow, I'm not sure if all those things that I thought were so important were so important. And especially one of the things in there's a lot of things in there, but one of the things in there is death really dispels our fantasies of control. That's the fact of the matter. It just comes. And so what I want to say is this. I think I'm right there with you. Although my daughter did come back and she brought the grandbaby. So there's eschatological hope. There's hope on the other side of these children. Then you finally get to the grandchildren, which obviously was the whole point now that I have them. Okay, here's the comparison that I'm trying to make. I think there is a weird way in which, and I hear you, it is so weird, isn't it? It's like a bone deep kind of grieving that you're like, well, I know that I'm not going to be like, I'm going to be fine, But there's something about that loss. It is like a little death, that is very instructive for the whole process. Yeah. You realize you never had all the control that you thought you did as you watch them walk out, and off to. I'm just going to tell you that I published this book about a year ago or a year and a half ago. And since that happened, I debated when I was writing it about writing a last chapter about parenting adults, which I did do. And I said this, Jennifer, I've thought so much about this because it turns out that you're still parenting when you have a 27-year-old. You don't still cut up their food. Thank God. But there's not that much out there for people who are like, what's happening to me? I feel so much about all this and I'm not sure and I don't know what my job is exactly. And so thank you so much. What other thoughts? I mean, I can offer you my opinion on that. It's just an educated guess. One thing I can say to you is parents didn't say goodbye to their children in the way that we do now. It just was not as common. The idea of going off to college wasn't perfectly unknown 100 years ago, but it was virtually unknown. Going off to college in a way that, I would need a car to get there? Yeah. And a few people did it. There were people who did it. Honestly, primarily very well-placed people. And there were people who were getting on a train and going to Oxford 100 years ago, sure. But not your kids. and they were not getting in a car. And so I do think you have to take that seriously. There is something very strange about sending an 18-year-old out. And I just gonna say this, sometimes say the same thing to people who are having a hard transition, either they are or their child is, with kindergarten. I mean, we did it with kindergarten, other people do it with kindergarten, but that's also something that nobody did. Literally, nobody did it 100 years ago. So it's just good to keep that in mind. I do think that, and I've seen historical records that make me think this. I do think that it happened sometimes, and I do think you do read. There are parents that will say, their child gets married, so now they're setting up maybe their own household. Not always, but maybe they are. That they and people did sometimes move because they married so and so or whatever. It's a grief. It's a loss of a connection. So I'm telling you, won't hear from me that the only reason that people miss their children is because they've been too, controlling and protective. But I think it's a very interesting self-examination to say, what's really so uncomfortable about this, and it's a combination of things, right? And to be pretty ruthless with yourself on the questions of control. But be nice to yourself too, because it's all about tenderness. Other people be nice to you. Now, I think that's one thing that can happen. It can be shocking to realize that you have adult children you don't talk to for hours, days. I don't know. Your kids probably call every day. whatever. But how important it can be to come back to you as a touchstone. I like it. I think it's a rich model that gives us a lot of ways to think about it. And I like it because there's a sense in which it comes back to something as simple, in a sense, it's just as simple as companionship. What we're really doing is being with our children. It's just that I use that word that phrase, productive companionship, because I think the other funny thing that can happen with parenting is, even though none of us can really do this, there's this ideal of like, I'm just on the floor playing with my child all day. Can I share? No humans did this. No humans sat on the floor and played with their child all day. That's just not how humans did it. Okay? Don't worry. I mean, sure, get off your phone and talk to your child, but don't worry about, you have to be down on the floor playing with your 100 years ago, kids were playing with other kids on the floor. But do you know what I mean? So that's, to me, it's kind of a, this kind of intense sort of like what I have with my child is a relationship like I have with, of course you do. But just to think of it, to separate, to use the classic psychological terms, to take work and love and separate them and put them in two different categories makes both of them so much more intense and kind of weirdly out of balance, actually. Yeah. So, I mean, I played on the floor with my kids. I don't know. I don't remember what I did. So I have a love-hate relationship with the idea that you should be very intentional about your parenting. And here's my, in a nutshell, here's my love-hate. I actually think in almost any context, parents ideally give thought to what they say to their children, to what they do with their children. And I don't want to just be kind of in a very naive romantic, if we just went back 100 years ago, everything was so great. Like, there were a lot of things that were not great 100 years ago. In other words, I think 100 years ago, people did think carefully. I'm just going to give you a little example of this. When I did my PhD work at Duke, and when we lived in Durham, we had an across the street neighbor who was, she's passed away now. She was probably a little bit older than my parents, 90. She was probably born around the Depression, right around the Great Depression. And she, in rural North Carolina, okay, in 1934, picture. And she was one of 8 in her family. In many ways, her growing up predates what I'm talking about here. And I remember her telling me one time that we were talking about 8 children, and I remember her saying to me one time that her mother had a habit. She made a point of speaking to each one of the 8 children every day, which sounds kind of funny, but she meant it more than, come on, dinner's ready. She spoke in a conversational way to each one of her 8 children every day. Do you know what I mean? I don't mean to make it more than it was. I'm not saying they sat down for a big conversation. She just said, "Oh, Sue, look how beautiful those flowers look in that light," or whatever. "John, I sure did appreciate you being so sweet to your sister." Real talking. And I mean, I think if you have 8 kids in rural North Carolina in 1934, that's actually intentional parenting. And she did. She told me she had a rule about this. And I think that element is something valuable. What do you want to say to your kids? What do you want to say to them? And of course, those kinds of things, that little thing every day, is going to be by far more powerful than any one-time vacation or something. Okay, now I do hate it a little bit because now we have intentional parenting on crack. Sorry, you're probably not supposed to say that here. Crack, I don't know. Sorry. But you know what I mean? It's so self-conscious all the time that it's exhausting, and kids feel it too. They're exhausted by our intentional parenting too. I would also say that, it's certainly the case that at the present moment, I'll just say very broadly, if you're a person of faith and you want to hand on faith to a child as part of your apprenticeship, you're going to have to be intentional about that. In fact, that is a reality that's only growing more and more true every day. And that's something that modern parenting would say to you. It would say, think about that. What do you want to say? What do you want to do? What do you want, Does that make sense? Yeah. Yeah, just don't go crazy, okay? That's why they pay me the big bucks here, because I come give you helpful advice like, just don't go crazy. It's a good question. Okay, so here's what I mean. To not manage is to think very carefully about how many obligations and deadlines and requirements and structures you want to introduce into your family's life. Think very carefully. Because once we make commitments, then we need to, I think it's good to think about, as your children are growing up, how many times a day do you want to have to say to them, all right, it's time to get in the car. Can you where are your shoes? You just had your shoes. It's exhausting to get everybody in the car. Don't do it any more than you have. It's a loss in your family's life for you to make kids stop whatever they're doing and get in the car. I also mean limit the number of ways that you want to manage your children. I'm a big fan of let them wear whatever they want. I'm just telling you, honestly, I'm a big fan of let your children wear whatever they want. Okay. A third thing I'm going to say to you is, again, there's places to be very serious with yourself. And one of them is to ask yourself, be kind of ruthless with yourself about what you're doing with your children because you're concerned how it's going to look to other people. Because maybe you don't want to apprentice your children to be constantly worrying about what everybody else thinks. Again, please don't go crazy. Do please tell your son to stop the potty talk, because it's kind of embarrassing for all of us. You're thinking about what it means for your children to interact in public in respectful ways. Of course you are. But you know what I mean. You know what I mean. Yeah. I think it has to be active, intentional resistance to the idea that I'm supposed to put everybody together and... Does that make sense? Yeah. And I have to say, sometimes I say to people, you might think through some of these ideas about parenting. For some people, they actually end up making some big change in their life. You know what? We just can't live like this anymore, where dad is driving 45 minutes to work for whatever. It just doesn't work. And that's possible. I really encourage people to ask those hard questions, because you only get this one life. A lot of times it's much smaller things. And a lot of times it's maybe it's possible that you take what I say to you today and that just becomes something that you chew on over the long haul. And it changes, a little alteration in your trajectory can really change where you are 10 years from now. Just don't worry. How old are your children? Okay. Just please, one of them's going to go get a tattoo. Just don't worry about it, okay? That's what I'm saying to you. Seriously, just don't worry about the tattoo. Everybody's got to get a tattoo now. It's ridiculous. Just don't worry about it, okay? I'm not judging you. Really, save your energy. because we need all the energy we can find to love our children. Just let go of it all. And that's the kind of thing that I'm thinking about when I say, it is so funny sometimes for parents when they're right at the edge of a child leaving. We've been there before, and you're still trying to figure out things like curfews, or where you're talking to a child who like a week from now is going to live at college and they're going to do whatever they want, and there's a moment where you kind of you just see so clearly at that moment that, and so you know what I mean? That's the kind of thing I mean, that you're raising adults. In fact, I'll say one other thing here. I am thinking a lot about the older child thing. I'll say one other thing here too that I think is not always, well, the thing is when your kids are littler, you just have to give all of your time and attention to getting them to whatever you think of, 18, 19, whatever you think, 21. But for most of us, we're going to have a lot more time in relationship with our children when they're adults. I don't mean, of course, you're not going to probably spend as much time with them every day as you do with your 2-year-old. But do you know what I mean? If God is generous to you and you have a long life and your children have an average life, you're going to have many, many years where you're in relationship with them as adults. That's kind of what you're moving towards. And I think, I don't know, that just can be a very helpful frame when you're like, you are not what I want you to be when they're 11 or something. Actually, it's 17. Let's just be honest with ourselves. It's not 11. It's 17. It's 17. I was at the DMV on my 15th birthday and on my 16th birthday. That was like a big tradition, right? I think the simplest answer is a very simple one. The simplest answer is a very obvious one, is what I mean to say. Our children's lives happen on screens in a way that we do not even fully grasp. I really recommend to you the work of Jonathan Haidt on this question. But you can see what that means, right? If like one of the reasons we wanted to get cars was so we could be with our friends. Our cars were all about friends. Well, can you imagine if you had had access to every friend at midnight while you were kind of access, but you know what I mean? I just think there's a very simple answer to that question. Where do you need to get to? And I've noticed it. It's so striking. You've probably seen it here too. But you can see it like instantaneously. Up where we live, it's often a snow day, but connected to a power outage. And what's just, it's instantaneous. When there's a power outage, people start coming out of their houses. You know what I mean? It's like sci-fi or something. There are others. And so that's not going to be something that's going to, you see what I'm saying? It's not going to be easy for you to tweak that. You can't make it so that, you can't teleport your daughter back to 1993. Well, I have a twofold answer to that question. I do think that there are ways in individual families to offer another vision and another kind of life to your child. But I do also say to people, I think it's good it's funny, I've had long conversations with our eldest son about this, who is, I don't remember how old any of my children are anymore. I have no idea how old my children are. He's about to be 25. Yeah. And he's a very intense philosophical kid. And he's talked about how much he hates phones and how there is no way for him to get back to, he would probably say 1985 or something. He can't do it. He can't make it so that everybody's hanging out as somebody. And he actually was really blessed in a lot of ways. He had a childhood that honestly looked a lot more like that group of guys that would hang out and blah, blah, blah. So I would say both of those things to you. I would say, and I know that sounds like a counsel of despair, but I just think it's a counsel of realism. Like, you cannot reshape the culture so that you can reshape the culture in a way for your kids when they're 5, 3, and 1. Because then you've got them in your house and you're like, this is what we don't have, whatever you decide. We don't have red dye and we don't have TV or whatever, I mean, we didn't have a TV in our house when our kids were growing up. But you can't do that when they're 21, 17, and 15. They're actually just going to live in the world. And so I think it's good to be realistic about it. I will tell you this. I'm not really answering your question, Arl, at all, am I? Yeah. I've been teaching for like 35 years now. So I can actually see the thoughts going across your forehead. And they're saying, I don't know if she's really answering this question right now. But this is to galvanize you. And I don't know what, folks who are teaching at FranU would say, but my students at PC, Providence College, are not unanimous, but overwhelmingly, they say they wish they didn't have to have a phone at all. And they say they wish that they lived in an earlier era where they didn't need a phone. Okay, so I'm going to tell you one thing I do with my students, and maybe it's just kind of a little bit of a model. For several years now, every semester, I give all of my students an extra credit option of, I call it the attention project, because all of our attention spans have shrunk to about 13 seconds now. And the heart of the thing is that they simply must be unplugged for an hour every day for the duration of this thing. And I think of it as a little, I'm under no impression that they're going to now throw their phones away. How would they be in touch with people? I mean, it's very hard to do it. But what I want them to do is to be equipped to know the possibilities. And now maybe they're just telling me, what I want to hear, but I give credit for the extra credit, whatever they say. And what they say to me is, I cannot believe how hard this was. It was way harder than I thought it was going to be. And I also feel like this might have changed something for me for the rest of my life. And all they did was for 6 weeks, they were off their phones for 1 hour. And I give them other little assignments too, like during the 1 hour this week, you should talk to another human who's also not on their phone. And they're like, this was so great. I talked to my mother, whatever. And another week they have to take a walk. They have to take a walk while they're not on the phone. But I do think, here's what I want to say. I do think that kind of creating little alternate universes here and there. You can't create a whole other alternate universe. You just can't. But you can create little alternate universes. So one thing we did with our kids with screens was, we had the rule, now it's like a standard in nice families, you don't have your phone at the table, right? You don't have your phone at the table, at the dinner table. And so what we found at one point in our family's life where our kids were a certain age, was we would just extend that in a certain way by saying that they could not be on their phones, no screens of any kind, 1 hour before dinner. And you know what? It was kind of like a power outage. They all came wandering down, or out, whatever they were doing. And it was easier for me to get somebody to set the table, that's for sure. And we have several kids, and so they were they wanted to bond with each other about this loss that they were experiencing. But I think you can do little things like that. We have not done it, but I think I would have done it. If I had younger kids right now, I would do it. And that is to create other kinds of completely unplugged experiences of a day or a weekend or whatever. I can hear my grandfather saying the blessing before the meal, That's why for me, this initiative back in our diocese is about the table. I just feel like there's lots of things that we do. It's not the only thing, but it's just nothing more important. And especially for Christians, because for us, the table is always also sacramental in a pretty deep way. And one thing that I found is, as I was trying to teach students who were largely Catholic, at Providence College, we have a very large percentage of, relatively, a large percentage of undergraduates who would say they're Catholic when they come in the door, like 3/4 maybe of our students. And I was trying to speak to them in an introductory theology class about the Eucharist. And as I tried to talk with them about what the Eucharist is, I often do draw their attention back to their own experiences of meals like that. It's not the only thing the Eucharist is. It's not just a meal. But if you don't have that, if you've never had the experience of feasting, it's very hard to understand what the Eucharistic feast is. Very hard. And that was another thing that led me to this initiative. I was like, how are we even we don't even have the human experience to build on to speak about our theology of the Eucharist. We did it. Our kids we had dinner. It was not until we had like kids who were much older, who were out with friends or whatever, and we didn't require them to be at the table. Of course, as they get older. Yes. In fact, I want to say to you, this information won't be hard to find, but one of the goals of the project is to have a dedicated website, which is just nothing but chock full of resources to help you. Here's a little table prayer for Lent if you have kids who are mostly under 12. Here's a little Advent thing if you have kids that are mostly over 12. Here's a fun dessert to make on this feast day. Here's some...
We're saying 20-minute recipes, right?
Yeah, 5 ingredient. As it turns out, there are no end of them. But also just some other, let us suggest to you how if you have kids who are neurodivergent, it's not so easy to just tell them to sit in a chair. What other things are possible? So the answer is yes. What we're going to do is Jennifer, somebody is going to follow up and send you a link. What I have right now is a placeholder website so that if you know where that is, then you can come back and see it. But actually, it's part of our hope is that the website itself is not intended in any way to be limited to the Diocese of Providence. It's intended to be a resource for anybody who is in this situation. Let's think about this. How do we want to do this? And maybe we even want, you got to figure out how ambitious you're going to be. Am I supposed to stop talking now? It's like, we're just. Okay. You got to think about how ambitious you want to be. One of my favorite stories from a friend of mine is when I think they had 2 little kids at that time, but they were going to do an Advent thing at the table. And, there's the candles and one week is the prophets and it just goes on and on. Anyways, they had this whole liturgy thing. And again, the kids are like 5 and 2 or something. And she said,
For a really ambitious.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I think it was like by day 3, they would light a candle and say, "Come, Lord Jesus," and then they blow out the candle and eat. Which is fine. That's perfectly appropriate. You have to decide how ambitious you want to be, but you might even want to be a little bit ambitious about this. I'll just say one thing I always suggest to people is just a minimally ambitious thing. You might want to institute a habit, maybe every night, I don't know, but at your table of inviting, and you too, inviting family members to share a prayer request. So you're going to have a short blessing, but you're just going to say, and we remember, your friend's grandmother who died last night. You know how that is in 2nd grade, yeah.
The problem with that
Yes.
is it becomes a tennis match.
Yeah.
Intention, bad intention.
I know. Only you can figure out what to do at your dinner table. But do you know what I mean? There's all different levels of ambition. I say to families, if they're not eating together in any way, then maybe just have a Sunday. Maybe just have dinner on Sunday. Just on Sundays, you know what I mean, for right now. And if you're already having a dinner every night, maybe you want to kind of think about, could we do a little something?
Sorry, the child care incident, although I'm watching the dance, so I think they're okay. Anyway, can we please give it up to Dr. Coolman?